Hi BookTube, welcome back to my channel. My name is Juan. I am just one reader and I am here just with a very casual Friday Reads video. I hope you enjoy. The first book that I want to discuss briefly is a book that took me by surprise. I think it's fair to say this is the most surprising, in a good way, book that I have read thus far in the year. Therefore, I strongly would love to recommend it to you, and that is The Rehearsal by Eleanor Catton. So I think we all know Eleanor Catton here on BookTube because she's the author of The Luminaries, which was I think a Man Booker winner, nominee. I think it won the Man Booker Prize way back in, I don't know, 2014 or 15 or something like that. I might be mistaken. But I think The Luminaries was a book that pretty much we all read on BookTube back in its day. And The Rehearsal is Eleanor's debut novel. It's incredibly different to The Luminaries, and in my humble opinion, 1,000 times better, which I know is a very strong thing to say because The Luminaries is a fairly beloved book on BookTube specifically. But I think The Rehearsal was just more to my liking. I think this is more my kind of novel. I love the way that The Luminaries explores the narrative form, or like how it's an experiment in narrative structure and the style and astrology. And as a reading experience, I think it's a fun book, but I never really fell in love with The Luminaries. I always felt like it was a book that I admired more than enjoyed or loved or resonated with. The opposite is true for The Rehearsal. The Rehearsal is a much simpler story, but it's just such a perfect experiment. It's much shorter than The Luminaries, of course. It's a tighter novel. It's very different in terms of its subject matter, its themes, and the way that it approaches the story, different characters. Essentially, The Rehearsal is a story about teenagers, and we follow some classmates at a school, and then some students that go with a they sort of go to a saxophone teacher, and they have lessons with her. It's about a drama school and the theater company there, and it's just, I really don't want to spoil anything for you because I really want you to read this book, so I'm not going to say much more. But it's just such an interesting concept. It's a fairly simple, quotations, story about a sex scandal that goes on at this school and what happens surrounding that and after that. But really, it's the way that this story is told that I found completely fascinating. Just really fascinating. It's again, just like The Luminaries, this is an experiment. I actually think this is even more of an experiment in terms of narrative and the structure and the voice, the way that this story is told, the way that Eleanor Catton plays with theater and art and, well, the creative arts in general and music. And I think this is just ultimately a story about two things, in my opinion. One, it's an exploration of relationships, especially relationships with dealing with authority or some kind of control or imbalance or power, whether it be, siblings or teacher-student relationships or parents and children relationships. Boyfriend and girlfriend. There's just a very interesting exploration of power dynamics. And it's what I love about that is that she is not simplistic about those imbalances. Everything is complex, everything is vague, everything is sort of there for you to interpret and ponder and think over. And I really, really love and appreciate when an author is brave enough and smart enough to do those things. The second thing that I think this novel is about is truth. It's an exploration of truth and fiction, art. You know, I love Stephen Sondheim, the musical theater artist that I worship. And I thought this is a very Stephen Sondheim kind of book in the way that it addresses fiction and art in a very playful, musical manner. So yeah, I don't know what to tell you. This book was such a Juan book. I really, really, really liked it. It was such a surprise. I never thought it would be one of my favorite books of the year, which it is. I am giving it 4 stars, which might sound a little underwhelming because I'm really, really loving this book and you know, shouting it out. But I only give 5 stars to books that just really deserve it and that are like personal favorites. So this is a great book. I really, really loved it, and I think you should read it. I'm still thinking about it, and it's a book that I think will haunt me for quite some time. Then I started reading the short story collection By Light We Knew Our Names by Anne Valenti. This is the first book that I have read by this author. It's a book that I picked up years and years ago. It was recommended by Mercedes from the channel Mercy's Bookish Musings. She is always recommending this book, and I remember distinctly hearing her rave about this collection. And you know, Mercedes is someone that I've followed on BookTube since I joined BookTube. I think since before I joined BookTube, actually. And I've always really enjoyed what she reads and what she recommends. I think there's a lot of overlap in our reading tastes, and this is a short story collection. I really like reading short story collections, although I don't read enough of them because, I don't know, for some reason I always gravitate towards novels and yeah, that's what I read. Novels and the occasional nonfiction. But really, I love short stories. I have a lot of them here in my personal library that I haven't read, many of them recommended by Mercedes herself because she loves them. And, you know, most of my short story collections that I've purchased because of her and the way that she's hyped them up to me, or well, for everyone. And so I don't read them enough, but when I do read them, I think it's probably my favorite format. I don't know if I can say that. That sounds like a very, very strong claim because I really think that novel is what I love reading, but short stories are just great. And I think the reason why I don't read them as much is because, you know, I feel like you never read a short story collection in one go. You always take one and put it, well, this is me, I'm talking about myself. I always go and pick one out and put it on my bedside table or my reading table right here, and I will read a story and then go do something else and read something else, like a novel, and then I will come back to the collection and read another story later. So it's a different kind of experience in terms of rhythm and pace, but I love when a short story blows my mind the way that some of the stories in this collection have. These stories in By Light We Knew Our Names by Anne Valenti are exactly the kinds of short stories that I like reading. They are the right amount, I mean the right length. They are exactly the right length. They're not too short, they're not too long. They are just perfectly written. There's not a lot of fluff in the writing. It's not like really pedantic, overwhelming writing. It's actually very simplistic but beautiful, and simplistic but with a lot of baggage and a lot of grit and a lot of musicality in the writing as well. And I think that every single story that I have read thus far in the collection, which I am halfway through, every single story has managed to create a world in and of itself and its own sort of context and its own sort of feel. I really love these collections. These stories in this collection, because they are sort of weird and kooky and zany. Some of them are like actual magical realism. Some of them are just like wacky and sort of a little off kilter, just off kilter enough. But what I love is that these stories fall under the category of, to me, it's a category of emotional reading. It's reading about emotions, and those emotions are conveyed perfectly through the tone and the musicality of the language, and also the weird magical realism thing and the imagery. For example, there's a story, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a story where there's this girl and she's constantly seeing the ghosts of her grandparents, and then this kind of weird ideas that just really manage to perfectly convey the emotional tone and conflict of the characters. So I am really liking this collection, and I will probably finish it by the end of August. Oof. And finally, my the last book that I want to discuss in this video is the book that I am starting tonight. I haven't actually started it yet, but I will as soon as I record this video and upload it. I will be finally starting Gormenghast, which is a trilogy by Mervyn Peake. This trilogy, Gormenghast by Mervyn Peake, is a contemporary of The Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. Many people say that Mervyn Peake was the better of the two, which is very interesting to me. This is always recommended to me by pretty much everyone. Everyone who knows my reading taste, especially regarding fantasy, recommends this to me, because it's supposed to have this kind of Dickensian vibe to it in the writing, in the imagery, in the feel of the world. I guess you could call that atmosphere. But it's also kind of kooky and funny, but also dark and ominous. I am a reader who really enjoys setting. That's why I love the Harry Potter books so much, because of the setting. And this book, Gormenghast, well, the trilogy Gormenghast, takes place in the castle of Gormenghast, which is supposed to be like the most important part of the books. It's actually the premise of the entire trilogy. The castle that is just so overwhelmingly huge that it's like a labyrinth, and it's a world, an entity of its own. So I will be starting book 1 of this trilogy, which is, I think it's Titus Grown. I think that's the title, yeah. And these are illustrated by Mervyn Peake himself, and those illustrations are actually part of why these books are so highly revered as well, because, you know, Mervyn Peake really was like an artist. Like, he created a beautiful, intricate story, a wonderful world, language, but the language is supposed to be a little hard to get into. But yeah, he also drew the illustrations for this world, and they are supposed to really bring up a lot of flavor to the world and the stories and the characters. So I am incredibly excited to read Titus Grown, book 1 in the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake. I have a lot of really high hopes for this one. So that's what I will be reading, and I guess I'll have to see you next week and tell you how I'm doing with it. Anyway, if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, anything you want to say at all, please leave a comment down below, and I will see you next week.